Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. On this podcast, we pour from the seemingly endless queue of movies, television shows, and maybe even other surprises along the way as part of our podcast channel From the Queue. Please subscribe, like, and review From the Queue on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform, especially Spotify and Apple, as you can get those algorithms going with positive feedback. You can find us on BlueSky at From the Queue. You can find us through Instagram at From the Queue as well as Threads. If you're listening to us on YouTube, all of our links will be in the description below. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Instagram at Jerome Cuson. You can find me on BlueSky at Jerome C1985. My co-host is Brian. You can find him on Twitter for now at Brian DeBrain.
The Whiz Kids had won it, Bobby Thompson had done it, and Yogi read the comics all the while. Rock and roll was being born, marijuana we would scorn. So down on the corner the national pastime went on trial. We're talking baseball, Klazuski, Campanella, talking baseball. The man and Bobby Fella, the scooter, the ball.
It's a movie that brings generations of baseball fans together and has even gone as far as to have its own MLB game dedicated to it. Of course, we're talking about the fantasy, sci-fi, mystery baseball movie Field of Dreams, released May 5th, 1989. Its 35th anniversary.
Extraordinary words for a movie that no words can capture. Newsweek calls Field of Dreams a magical and moving ride. So perfect it's like a miracle, says Roger Ebert.
Are you a ghost?
Kevin Costner scores again with a wonderful performance, says Pat Collins. And Gene Shalit calls Field of Dreams a masterwork of wonderment.
Is this heaven?
Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams, rated PG. Now playing at a theater near you.
And this is the third movie of the 9 we're kind of examining this year in terms of baseball classics. And, I was thinking about, the list that I was putting together when I put this together. And I was thinking, I don't think any movie that we're going to review is going to top this. And I was kind of putting on so early, but I wanted to go in chronological order. But, man, 1989, like I mentioned, I made a mistake in last month's episode where I said they were 2 weeks apart. It was actually a month apart. But still, in the beginning of May, you had the opportunity to watch Major League and Field of Dreams as a double feature in a single day, which is incredible. I'm sure some people did that. I probably would have done it as well. But, man, this movie on paper honestly should not work. It's a fantasy, like I mentioned. It's a mystery. It's a sci-fi movie. It's about ghosts. They never really explain it. It's a religious movie at the same time, but it's also about America and the heart of America and about baseball and tradition and the one constant thing throughout all the changes in our in our society. It's been baseball, according to James Earl Jones, Terrence Mann. But man, this movie is like a giant Twilight Zone episode, and it's shot beautifully well, and it has no villains in it, so to speak, and yet somehow it's like one of the all-time classic fantasy movies, sports movies. It transcends even the sports genre, I think, and to the point where it's like every one of the performances is so on point that it feels like the casting was meant to be this way. And one quick note off the bat, they wanted Robin Williams in the role of Ray, and I can see it, but we talked about how he doesn't have that athletic look, and Kevin Costner clearly has that athletic look, and based on the casting of Durham the year before, the producers were a little hesitant to cast him, but based on what Kevin Costner read in the script, he felt like this was a James Stewart, Frank Capra, modern day It's a Wonderful Life, which I kind of disagree with, but they do show James Stewart in a role from the movie. Was it the Harvey? I think is the movie they showed about, again, mental health. So a lot of things coming full circle in this, but man, this movie should not work. But somehow it's a miracle. And if you look at it from the director's standpoint, Phil Alden Robinson, he had no hits, and this is his only success practically outside of maybe the Sum of All Fears from 2002. But it's just a miracle in his career because this is the only thing he's going to be remembered for, and the rest of his career was kind of mid-card, so to speak. So again, this is a miracle of a movie that, I don't know. It stands the test of time, and it's perfect for TV because it's an hour and 40 minutes, and you can just cut the whole thing, and it fits in a 2-hour time slot for TV.
I mean, I think that this is a movie that I would agree should not work. I think it works because everybody is playing it straight. They're playing it sincerely. You just don't get this in a lot of movies. I think that one of the big issues with so many modern movies, whether they're comedies or not, is in order to go for the laugh, they're going for irony, they're going for snarkiness. Like, just think about every Marvel movie where they make fun of the name of the character. And I think it was funny like the first time, but it's just gotten to the point where like we're 30 movies in, they don't need to be making fun of these names. And to me, the charm of this movie is that it is such a sincere, it's not devoid of humor. Like there's definitely some moments that are intended to make you laugh, but I think there is a sensitivity to a lot of what's going on. And I think there are a couple of jokes at Iowan's expense, but I think that there is a love for this brand of America, I guess you could say, which I do have some mixed feelings about, but I appreciate the fact that they play it straight and that they really allow this movie to exist as a tribute to a certain kind of baseball. And I mean, look, Kevin Costner in this movie is just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, this might be his best performance. And I know that, he's done Dances with Wolves and he's got, so many movies from the late 80s and early 90s in his oeuvre, so to speak. But I mean, this might be like in terms of challenges, like this has to be the hardest movie that he's ever had to be a part of because there's a literal magic to it, and just the casting all around, bringing in James Earl Jones, I think is incredible casting, and just the way that he kind of starts out as this very aloof figure, but then they go to Fenway Park, and I mean he gets sucked into the magic of Iowa, and this is one of Burt Lancaster's final performances, and what makes that so special is that here is this legend, and he's playing a non-legend in baseball, but like he just carries this aura of something special, and you don't get that in a lot of movies these days. You don't get that reverence for anything, and I think it's a lost art. It's something that I would love to see come back because I think you could argue like it's bordering on self-parody to be as reverent as they are to baseball, but to me that's what baseball is. And I think that's why modern audiences, that's part of the problem with it. But I think for those who appreciate baseball in so many ways, Field of Dreams is the ultimate realization of that vision.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting too, because I mean, we will watch the Ken Burns documentary, Baseball from '94, but you told me that it was in production all the way in '89. And I couldn't help but think, like, there's some scenes in the middle of this movie where they're interviewing some of the local townsmen about that Burt Lancaster character, Archibald Graham. And it just feels like, I mean, those are clearly like, I don't know if they're actors, but those seem like real people from the town kind of thing, where they're casting actual people. And that's the Ken Burns vibe, man, because he gets real people and he sucks you in with real stories and the way it's shot and just the way they were building up this reputation of Archibald Graham, not as a baseball player, but as a man who like was a doctor for the town and was there for the town to help people for the town. So it's all about, cause and effect and time travel and multiverse. It's all that, but they don't really go into the magic of it all, which is, I think, important. Because I think if you start explaining everything, it obviously loses the magic, right? And we hear this criticism about that in wrestling, right? We've exposed too much of the business for it to be so effective. For that argument, it's true for this movie because they don't need to explain that. Is this heaven? Is this a fantasy? Is this whatever? It's got that Twilight Zone feeling where you don't really need to explain the magic for the effectiveness of the themes to be, to go through, because the themes of like, father-son relationships, regret, unfulfilled dreams, going for your dreams. That's all a part. It's all about building this field, like metaphor, a giant allegory, metaphor, whatever you want to call it. And then it becomes this giant adventure across the country, man. And Terrence Mann, played by James Earl Jones. The first time I watched this movie, I thought he was a real author, and I had to look it up and just make sure, because it just seems like they're talking about a real author that affected 60s culture, right? But in reality, it's just kind of like a variation of J.D. Salinger. And if you ever read A Catcher in the Rye, it didn't affect me like personally, but I did see like how it can affect other teens and who were going through some angst around that time when they read that book. So I can kind of see as the inspiration as to this Terrence Mann character that they got from that and how influential he was in the 60s. Um, just and then the way James Earl Jones plays it, it seems like he's been this guy that's been seen as like almost like a messiah figure to the kids of the 60s who just doesn't have the answers for him. He's like, look for the answers on your own kind of thing. And like, I'm not a, I'm not a drug user. I'm not doing drugs. I'm not here for you, that kind of thing. And he kind of rejects them. So there's a lot of that feeling that a lot of these authors from the 60s and 70s kind of have gone through, that have kind of like realized that, you know, some of these books that influenced that era of the culture in the United States, they, you know, they kind of see their authors as like on this pedestal, right? And they try to like make them into these like leaders that they don't want to be. They just want to write books. And that's kind of what this character is. And deep down, he just wanted to be a baseball player as a kid. And that's kind of the heart of it. And despite like these connections, because like it's the characters of Ray and his wife Amy that look up to Terrence Mann and his writing and when they were in college. So then he, you know, that's the connection they have there. And then somehow it all connects to baseball. So even this Archibald character really has nothing to do with them. It's just still part of this journey to bring these lost souls together onto the field. And that's kind of like the message he's bringing. It's almost like he's like a, like, what do you call it? A herder, a sheep herder or something. Like he's gathering all these lost souls together and, you know, easing their pain. And the quote is eases pain, right? Even though we don't know whose pain, it's probably Ray's pain, but still, it's still a metaphor for all these lost souls that wanted to play baseball or had this dream to play baseball. And the field is allowing them to have this transformative experience and all these ghosts are coming in. So it's just a crazy movie, right? And when you describe it, it just sounds like chaos, right? This idea of baseball players coming in, ghosts, you don't know what's going on, messages on the screen. Is it mental health? They mention mental health, right? But then once it just goes down to it, it's all about emotions and family connections and relationships. So there's that's the magic to it of this movie. It's so baffling to me how this came together. Because considering like the book is kind of this, it's just a similar shtick, right? It's like a fantasy book. Everything's the same. Shoeless Joe Jackson comes to Iowa. But I don't know, because it's like when you put this on paper, it reads like nonsense to me. Like when you honestly just read it out loud, but then when you put it on film,
I mean, I think there are a lot of movies that are like that, though. I think if you were to present the idea of Star Wars in 1974 or 5, I mean, that movie would read like complete and utter nonsense as well. But when you have artists who have the courage of their convictions, every movie, any good movie is kind of a miracle, right? Because so many things have to go right. And in this case, there's the extra challenge of just the plot line just being, it's nonsense. I mean, legitimately, regardless of how good we feel about this movie, I mean, it is just completely unrealistic. And it works because Phil Alden Robinson took it seriously. It works because the actors playing the Black Sox all take it seriously. I mean, this is, you know, I know that when Ray Liotta passed, there was a lot of talk. Oh, the guy, Goodfellas. A lot of people talked about him in that role, but like to me, like he is so important to the function of this movie, and James Earl Jones is as well. Yeah, I just think that when you have the quality of actors that you do, it just really works out. And it is unfortunate that they tried to get Jimmy Stewart to play Moonlight Graham. I mean, Burt Lancaster does a really good job. I want to say that because I think he does I think he really brings the sincerity to this movie that is consistent with everything else. But in my opinion, if Jimmy Stewart is in this role, I think it lands even harder just because of who Jimmy Stewart is. And I mean, I know that people kind of say, "Oh, Tom Hanks is the same as Jimmy Stewart in so many ways." But in 1989, people probably would have said like Kevin Costner is the logical extension of who Jimmy Stewart was as a character. And in a lot of ways, I think Kevin Costner's career has mimicked it. Just a lot of early success and then kind of settling into the Western genre. And I think that it's unfortunate. It kind of stings, but I mean, we did get something really good instead. I'm happy that Burt Lancaster kind of got his own farewell in some ways. But I also want to cite there's two casting decisions, Annie and Karen Kinsella, who I want to give a lot of credit to. Amy Madigan and Gabby Hoffman, kind of thankless roles in many ways, because this is very much a father and son. This is a boys movie in so many ways, but this is Gabby Hoffman's film debut. I think she does a great job of just believing and not coming across like a Disney kid or something like that. Be so easy to fall into that trap, and Amy Madigan as well. And I mean, the other thing is, like, with any movie, and this is the thing that I think we've lost because we're so obsessed with needle drops now. If you give your movie a good score, it can do so much of the work. Even the dreariest moments in a Star Wars movie can still come off relatively well because of John Williams. And again, with this movie, James Horner, the score, I mean, it's not as distinctive, but it's really excellent.
It sets the tone and mood. It's just so low key. It's not over the top, and it's just what this movie needs to be, because it's not a lot of noise. You're kind of focusing on the characters, and like especially in the cinematography as well. You're kind of focusing on that. So the music just kind of sets this calm tone, and it sounds like, you're about to watch old school baseball. That's the tone that it kind of feels for me, which it needs to be, and that's exactly what it is. So it was just fantastic. It got nominated for Best Original Score, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture from '89. I can't argue either way whether it should have won or not, but still, it's a timeless classic, so it totally deserved the nomination to get Best Picture. Originally, they titled this movie Shoeless Joe Jackson, which makes no sense, and I'm glad the audience kind of influenced that change in the test screenings. They kind of changed the movie or the name around. It was originally Dreamfield, which was the book. Field of Dreams, obviously, is the proper name now. And I mean, if you name this movie Shoeless Joe Jackson, people are going to go and thinking it's a biopic, and that's clearly not what this is. So I'm glad they changed that, because that would have confused me as a kid and a lot of audience goers. Sometimes you got to keep your title simple, folks, and that's kind of the message there. And I'm mentioning Burt Lancaster. I had to look this up because I had to make sure. Like, I felt like this was the only movie I've seen him in. I know that's kind of crazy considering he's kind of a Hollywood legend, but I looked it up and things come full circle. The only other movie I'd seen him in was The Island of Dr. Moreau, which we talked about in the Guardians 3 review. Check that movie out, folks. It's another weird one, but it's definitely got cool makeup in it for 1978 or whatever it was. But definitely check that out. And Burt Lancaster's Dr. Moreau in that one, so he's going a little crazy in that one. But still, like, this is his farewell. I felt at times maybe he was a little too charming, but that's kind of like old Hollywood meeting new Hollywood at the time, if that makes any sense. The clashing of generations, and I mentioned this movie is a generational movie, and I mean technically Kevin Costner goes back in time to like 1970 something to talk to this guy too. So just craziness, but still, like, he's so charming in that role for the two scenes that he's in, and that wink he gives when he's and then you see him as the younger version doing the wink. I thought that was great. Just a lot of great casting in this movie, and the guy that ends up, I forget the name, but he's one of the White Sox players, and he ends up playing Babe Ruth in The Sandlot, so that's really cool too. There's a lot of cool connections there as well. And then another Sandlot connection, obviously, is James Earl Jones. So we'll get to that in a couple of months. But man, just a lot of connections with this movie to other baseball movies. Obviously, Bull Durham. I guess this is the only chance, Jerome, you want to talk about Tim Robbins' pitcher stance really quick, if you want to. I don't know.
It's an abomination. It's literally one of the worst things that I have ever seen in a sports movie. His delivery is absurd, and I cannot believe that. I mean, Tim Robbins is fine, but I don't understand how you cast him and accept that delivery. I will never understand that. And I'm not saying you cast Charlie Sheen, but you gotta find somebody whose delivery is a little bit better than that. It's absurd.
And we may talk about Bull Durham next year if we do another run of baseball movies. I decided to pick this one over Bull Durham, try to keep it to one Kevin Costner movie. But yeah, because out of the two, this is definitely my favorite of the two for sure. Even obviously Bull Durham is much more sexier,
I like Bull Durham
and a lot more adult, right? It's still like this. I think is more of a general audience and still has a more general appeal to it. So
it's weird. There are elements of Bull Durham that I really like, but that's a movie that I've definitely cooled off on in recent years, just because the Tim Robbins stuff is just it's not good.
Well, there you go. And then I mentioned the MLB dedicating a whole game to this, and this was on August 12th, 2021. You mentioned it last week. The White Sox came back 9-8, two-run walk-off home run by Tim Anderson. So, and the first ever walk-off home run by a White Sox player was Shoeless Joe Jackson. So, weird coincidences, I don't know, but there was some iconic imagery that night. Kevin Costner was there that night, wasn't he? And then is this the one game, or was it the next year where they had Ken Griffey come out with his dad?
That was the next year because the Cincinnati Reds played the Chicago Cubs the next year. So it was a little bit of a different vibe, but I mean, it was a really cool concept, and it's unfortunate that with all the construction going on, that they have not been able to have a game the last 2 years. I know that they will be going back at some point, but I mean, I think it's really cool for them to go to Williamsport every year to do these games in different places. I think it's part of the magic of baseball. Like having a game in a big stadium is great, but to me, the essence of baseball is playing on those smaller fields in front of those smaller crowds. I think that's where the charm of the game is, and I think that's what Field of Dreams, the movie, captures. And I think that's kind of what the game captured in so many ways. Because again, there's like Iowa does not have really a professional sports team, and really the only athlete, like the only things that are associated with Iowa sports. I mean, you've got the Iowa football team that can't score points. You've got the game, and you've got kind of the Field of Dreams concept, and of course, Caitlin Clark, who is of course probably one of the most successful athletes ever in the city of Iowa at this point. But it's a really amazing thing, and obviously people have gone to the Field of Dreams now in Iowa. That is kind of a tourist destination, and I guess it's kind of fitting given how the movie ends. I mean, again, this is a movie that is intended to be about fathers and sons, and I think that it just works. And again, that ending of them playing catch, and like kind of this helicopter like view of panning back and just seeing all the cars line up. I mean, it's not only a great visual, it's a great ending, and it also just feels, I guess the word is natural. Like it doesn't feel staged. It feels like these cars are just starting to come up, and it feels like this is just happening. And I don't know that I've ever seen another movie capture the feeling of like this is a staged movie. This feels like it's actually happening.
Yeah, it took me a couple viewings to actually understand what was going on in that ending. Not the catch part, but like all the cars. Because when I first saw it, I was like, wow, that's a lot of traffic. What's going on here? Is there some kind of event going on? And then by the third viewing, I was like, oh, they all are answering the call. They got the dream or whatever, or they got the voice, and they're following the call. So I thought, oh, okay. So all these people are finally like showing up to the game and actually got the voice and the message. So when you think about it, it's actually a more powerful ending that way. And I didn't even realize that growing up as a kid. But that kind of leads into like, okay, there's been talk about a legacy sequel. You could, I mean, the way that, like I said, this script is like all kinds of fantasy. You can just make up stuff as long as you have that theme and good relationships and great characters. You might be able to actually pull off a legacy sequel, kind of like a Top Gun Maverick.
I would do it. I mean, I think the way that you do it is instead of doing the Iowa thing, I think you completely change it around. I think you do an urban setting. I think you put like a gentrification angle to it. And instead of the Black Sox, I think you have Negro League players instead. I think that's the route that I would take. I would completely distance it from the original Field of Dreams and do it in an urban setting. I think that would just and have a majority black cast. I think that would do so much to honor the Negro Leagues, because again, I love this movie, but let's not pretend that the 1919 baseball was perfect, because literally a portion of the population could not play Major League Baseball. And I think if you're going to do a legacy sequel, I think putting it back in Iowa is just dumb. I flat out think it's just a really bad idea. And I'm not even saying that my idea is necessarily good, but I think completely changing the dynamics, having a majority black cast, I think that works out so much better.
Yeah, and with the clock ticking on some of these actors, if you can get a James Earl Jones cameo of him coming out of the field all these years later or something
I
like
don't
that,
know, man. That's really pushing
I
it. He is 93
I know
years
it's
old.
pushing it, but I just have this visual because like we never see him come out. Like I think he's still alive, honestly. And I guess you can interpret it again any way you want to, but it feels like he's still alive, and he just went over to the other side just to visit or something. But I could just see him coming out of the field like 30 years later and going, well, what's been baseball up to lately? Kind of something like that. You know what I'm saying? And I do want Kevin. If you have a legacy sequel, I think you got to have Kevin Costner be the James Earl Jones role. Like you meet him halfway through the movie and like, wait a minute, you got a voice, and then all of a sudden like, come in, we got to talk. That kind of thing. That's kind of what I want. Is like you're experiencing it too. What is it telling you? And then Kevin Costner ends up helping these young kids build the field. I think that's some cool stuff to do too. So um, originally I thought this was a one and only movie. You can't do a sequel, but based on these latest viewings and the way that you kind of see some of these characters not necessarily die and leave open ended, there's a lot to play with. So that's all I'm going to say on that because I would totally be open to it for sure. Um, yeah, just some few notes here. 2 beers and 2 hot dogs in 1989 at a Red Sox game. It's $10. I spent $10 at
It would be
Universal Studios on Butterbeer.
$40 now.
Yeah, I spent that on Butterbeer at Universal Studios. And as of the night I watched this is the day after, but I went to Universal Studios. I was on the studio tour, and they always show the line of posters. I saw Field of Dreams and marked out. So what a fitting day to go home and watch Field of Dreams that day as well. So Universal Pictures all day long apparently for me yesterday. So there you go. But yeah, lots of positives. Obviously, excellent casting and performances. I think James Earl Jones is my favorite. I think the part where um, they're in Boston. It's after the game, and he goes Archibald Graham, and in that moment, it just feels like the movie turns because now he's part of the journey. He was kind of rejecting it, and now he's part of the journey. Is like, I guess we're going to Iowa or whatever. And it's just great. And I think the reaction of James Earl Jones when he sees the players for the first time is just like so funny and so genuine and so like like a heartfelt, honest reaction that you can't help but laugh with him or just laugh at the situation because the look on his face sells it so well. So he's my favorite performance by far. James Horner, like I mentioned, has a great score. The cinematography, very similar to Witness in terms of like getting these wide shots of the field and stuff like that. Just beautiful stuff. The last shot at the end and that helicopter shot with the traffic, just great stuff. And of course, the iconic lines in this movie: "If you build it, he will come. Ease his pain. Ease whose pain?" All that kind of stuff. Just classic stuff, man. Simple, effective writing. That's all it takes. Very Twilight Zone-ish, and it works. Some negatives about this movie. I guess we get no villain. I guess the brother character, your brother-in-law character, is supposed to be the villain, sort of, in that kind of role, but it doesn't really, do it for me. But does this movie need a villain? Is the question, because based on the writing, it probably doesn't.
That's not the point of this movie. I mean, I would argue that Timothy Busfield is kind of the antagonist. I would not say that he is an outright villain. I think he is looking for his brother's best interest, even though he kind of comes off mean and pricklish. I don't think that he is he's not obfuscating the situation either.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting too. But it's cool that at the end he sees them too, so it's starting to feel like this is not just a mass psychosis, because that's what they're kind of almost leading you to believe. Because there's at times they're shooting it well, where it's like there's baseball going on in the background. You see this brother character, and he's like, "There's nothing out here, Ray. What are you doing, Ray?" And then it's clearly like he just doesn't see it, right? And then he finally sees it at the end, so it's pretty cool.
Right. So
Yeah.
I want to say this before we end things here. So I wanted to see what Roger Ebert had to say about this movie. I kind of do that sometimes, and I feel like there's something that he says here that I kind of want to illustrate. So this is from Roger Ebert's 4-star review. He gave this a perfect 4 to 4 stars. As Field of Dreams developed this fantasy, I found myself being so willingly drawn into it. Movies are often so timid these days, so afraid to take flights of the imagination, that there is something grand and brave about a movie where a voice tells a farmer to build a baseball diamond so that shoeless Joe Jackson can materialize out of the cornfield and hit a few fly balls. This is the kind of movie Frank Capra might have directed and James Stewart might have starred in. a movie about dreams. And I can't think of a better way. Of course, Roger Ebert, legend himself. Can't think of a better way of saying that myself. I would say movies are even more timid now to put forth this level of sincerity. And I believe that we need to get back to it in order for movies, I think, to regain some standing. Because there's a lot of discussion about, the box office and all that stuff. And I just think there is a fundamental unwillingness about so many of these movies just willing to go to certain places and be sincere about it.
Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it too. Like I think he sums it up well. Because I mean, the willingness to be a part of this journey right off the bat, that's the magic to it, and there's like an innocence to it. So I get that, and I don't know. Like I said, this movie does not work on paper, but it's just a miracle. It's a 9 out of 10 for me for sure, and it does kind of make fun of people in Iowa a little bit in that middle scene.
A little bit, not
But I
that
feel
much.
like
I don't think it's that bad.
I feel like they were closely leaning with the book burning side until what Annie had to give that speech in the middle, and I'm just like, you were so so willing to burn a book just now until this lady called you out. So I don't know, maybe just tough love kind of thing, and people learn slowly in some other places. But yeah, that was a little, because they were really like pushing the burning of the book stuff, and Terrence Mann was kind of like the central author of that debate. So it all kind of tied in, but still, like that was kind of like, oh man, they're kind of making fun of people of Iowa right now. I don't know if they're that simple to just burn
The
books.
book
But
banning stuff might be the most relevant from this movie.
don't say that, Jerome. It makes me feel sad when you say stuff like that. But it's true. It's true.
I mean, it's true though. It's 100% true. I speak no lies.
I know. But yeah, this movie is one of those movies where it's kind of like you're nostalgic for the past. So I guess that's what it is, especially with 2 beers and 2 dogs for $10. So there you go. That kind of wraps up our discussion. Your final rating out of 10?
I mean, you're nostalgic for a feeling. I mean, I would say it's a 9 out of 10. I think you're nostalgic for a feeling. None of this is actually, I mean, the thing about it is that even when you go back to this idealized version, like there's still a lot of problems with baseball, as I mentioned before, but you are nostalgic for the feeling that baseball gave to you, not so much like the actual events and the actual time period. I think that's the thing. It's the same reason that people are nostalgic for old school wrestling. It's not the time necessarily. I mean, because it's the feeling that you got when you watched wrestling when you were 7 or 8 years old, and that doesn't make a difference. It's the same thing with X-Men, and people play off that nostalgia so often that it has lost its meaning.
For sure, but we're still going to get nostalgic next month, because next month's viewing for the 4th inning will be A League of Their Own, and I saw this movie a lot on Fox TV as a kid, and then when I finally saw the full version, I was kind of like, wow, man, this is like an unsung classic, but I felt like it's gotten its proper due in the last 10 to 15 years or so. And of course, with the
This
Amazon
is the
remake.
beginning of Tom Hanks' run that is absolutely legendary, and I'll talk about just how legendary next week.
Wow, you don't think Big was the start of it?
Well,
would
I
say
mean,
Big was the start, to be honest.
I think there's a lot. If you look between 88 and 92, there's a lot of movies that don't make their money back and are bombs. Big is an important movie for Tom Hanks' career, but in terms of starting the run, this is the first one, because from 92 until about 2002, it's unbelievable. And like I said, I will make the argument next month, but
gotcha, because I see you're skipping the Burbs, which I get. I understand that. I love that movie, but it didn't gross a lot, so I get you.
So this summer we are going to be 2024 is a historical year for anniversaries. We're talking 20, 30, 65 in some cases. So we are going to be celebrating a summer of anniversaries. And Brian, not only in honor of the anniversary, but because it's my birthday next week, I picked something very special, and I think Brian is really going to enjoy this one. Are you ready? Are you excited?
Oh, I'm ready, and you told me 2 weeks ago, and I couldn't stop laughing, and I was giddy about the idea.
All right, so with the first Tuesday of the month, we do the right match. So this is probably my favorite pairing. We are going to celebrate the 25th anniversary of South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. and we are pairing it with the Canadian Stampede match from July 6, 1997, as the Hart Foundation wrestled Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Legion of Doom, Goldust, and Ken Shamrock. And just a cavalcade. You were talking about one of my favorite movies of all time paired with two of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And Brian, I know that they are two of your favorites as well. I also know that you are a huge Legion of Doom mark as well.
Well, to me, they're the Road Warriors. You know, some call them the Legion of Doom, but I'm always going to be a Road Warriors guy. But yeah, and if you look at the dates, South Park debuted the show a month later on August 13, 97. So it's just
It's a very good timing. It's a good timing.
perfect. So yeah, and I like this match a lot. It's kind of like the last great match of the Road Warriors, the last great match of Brian Pillman's career. Obviously, 2 months later or 3 months later, he would pass away. And it kind of like resurrected like Anvil's career just a little bit. It made him seem like it was, I don't know. I feel like this match really elevated Anvil too. But for a few months, because after that he kind of had this badass push until the whole shenanigans happened and all the Hart family members left. So there's a lot going on in that match. And of course the movie, I've seen that so many times. I saw it on VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, all the iterations. And somehow I'm still not sure if Canada's a real country anyway. So I'm excited.
It is real. I've been there. So for Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.